Hello everyone. This video is part of a series where our main goal is to learn the basics of TypeScript so that we can use it in other projects. As you may have noticed, my other playlists all use TypeScript, so I thought that it would be very useful for me to make it available in case you don't have already some knowledge on TypeScript. So we discussed the basics, so the concepts behind TypeScript and how we can apply this to a project. And here we are using a React application, very basic one. We will build it all on the client side, but just so that we have something visual to interact with. So in the previous video, we discussed the very basic concept of React, how to decompose an HTML application into different components and how to assemble this HTML application again by using what's called JSX, right? So the JSX would be this custom tag that we build, and this is the core of React. And the second core principle is how React reacts to changes in the information that is passed to the component, right? So we discussed this in the previous video. And in this video, I thought that we can set up the material UI, right? See if everything is working as expected for us, and then make sure that we have everything that we need for then to start discussing TypeScript in the next video. So if I come to this website, which is the installation website of Material UI, then I have already the yarn command here that I can simply copy and paste in my application in order to install the Material UI. One thing that you will see from the documentation on their website, and I believe this I will also add as a link to in the video description, is that they mention something about fonts, right? So if we read a little bit careful, we say that it was designed with Roboto, and they give, for instance, a Google Web Fonts in order for us to import this font into our application. But if we look a little bit closer into the description or the instructions, then we can actually find a command that will allow us to install it with npm, right? So I think that this one makes more sense. Now we have installed all the packages here, and now we will go ahead with yarn add and font source Roboto, right? I can even have a look at the font source documentation. I have it open here, so let me close the duplicated tabs. So the font source Roboto I can simply add with yarn, and then something like this. Give it a couple of seconds. Okay, that was relatively quick. And then we can import this probably in this app component or even in the index.tsx file. Let's see what happens when we import in the index.tsx file. So here they say that we can import everything, or we can import only specific weights, right? And if I go back to the Material UI documentation, they say that the Material UI relies only on 300, 400, 500, and 700 font weights. So if I copy this principle here, I think we can simply import all that we need. Import the 300, 400, 500, and 700, right? Okay, let's see now whether everything is still working. So I'll just start my application and we should see the same thing that we had in the previous video, right? Give it a couple of seconds. It's still loading here. Exactly. So we still see the same thing that we saw in the previous video. This little change in the data is also reflected automatically in the UI. But of course, we are not going to work with that, right? So what we are going to do is I'm going to remove all of this. I'm going to remove all of this. I'm going to remove the header component. And within my app, all I want to do now is I want to have or start building everything from scratch, right? So what I will try to do is I will import some component from material UI. So let me put this like this, from material UI /core, right? So what could we import here? If I come to the core package, then I think that, well, let's see if it gives us some information about what we could import here. Exactly, yeah. So as you can see here, it really gives us an idea of all the components that are available, right? So accordion actions, badge, button, everything is, or bottom navigation, the button, the breadcrumb. So everything is imported or is exported as a named export from the index file. So if I come here and I want to import button, that should be possible, right? So now I will pass the button here. And if I want to see which kind of props I can pass to this button, remember that in the previous video we discussed the idea of props. So each component from material UI /core, it most likely receives some data, some information that we can pass to it via props in order to customize it. So let's see the types of properties that button can receive. It's the first time I'm visualizing this documentation, so you can either come to the code if you want to, or we can go back to the material UI website, go to the components, or more likely the components API here, right? And then here I should be able to find the button component. Exactly. So here it tells me how to import it. It gives us also the different props, right? It gives also the different props that we can use in order to customize the behavior of this button. So as far as I can see here, I think that the one that maybe we would define is children. That is, as you can see in the description, the content of the button. So children simply means all the components that are between the opening and closing tag of my button component, right? So everything that's in here, so for example, some text, this text is the children, right? This is one child, but we may have more components. So we could have some text and then some span with span text, or some new icon here, for example, right? So we can have multiple children in one component. So this we should pass, and then the classes I think we can skip. Color maybe we will leave to default, and disable doesn't matter for us. Size medium is fine. See, we can have an end icon, we can have a start icon, and the variant, maybe we can experiment a little bit with different variants, but let's see how this works to begin with. So I will save my application and I'll come back to my browser. Exactly, so now we have some very basic button here. We can click on the button, right? And we could maybe, let's say, play around with the variant. And here, let's see the possibilities that we have. So have contained, outlined, and text. So I think that the contained is going to have, if I'm not mistaken, the contained has a solid color background. The outlined has a border, but no background, and the text has none of them. So let's see how the contained looks like. And as you can see, if I don't pass anything, Typescript starts to complain, right? Because if I have a look at the variant property, so I'm just hovering over it, holding command and then clicking on that property, then it tells me which values it expects to receive. If I try to pass anything different than this, then Typescript is not going to allow me to do so. It's going to start complaining. And this is a very, very, very helpful way of avoiding all those JavaScript if-else checks, right? Because then we would need to start checking if the input is actually valid, but Typescript already does that for us. It tells you, I'm not going to compile if you don't pass me a valid input. And maybe here it will compile, so it may be the case that it will compile, but if we want to build this application, if I come here into the React, into the package.json, here we have a build, right? So let's try to build this app by, let's see what's going to happen. Exactly, so not even the compile is going to pass. So React script is smart enough to say, okay, if there are TypeScript errors, don't compile, right? In some cases, you may still compile depending on the tool that you are using to process the code, and the TypeScript error is just going to blow up in the browser, but that is not encouraged, right? I mean, if we are using TypeScript, we should make sure that there are no TypeScript errors, otherwise there is no value to using TypeScript. So let's use this variant contained here. It also provides some nice auto-completion for us. And now the code should compile. Exactly. So as you can see, now we have a button with a background, right? If I use the outlined, then I think we'll have a border. Exactly. So now we have a border, and maybe we can even play around with the color, right? So I think we have a primary color. Yeah, that's blue-ish, contained. Exactly. So we have several ways of customizing our components, right? And this is another aspect that is very important in React. It's never too hard code, or hardly ever too hard code some specific information in your components. There has always to be, or we always need to try to find a good compromise between hard coding something in the component and giving the user, or giving ourselves, the possibility of customizing it afterwards, right? Imagine if I were to hard code only these two properties in my button. Then let's have a look here. The color, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 colors, and the variant, we have 3 variants here. So this would mean that I would have to have 12 different buttons, right? So I would have a button primary contained, a button primary outlined, and a button primary text. And each of these is one variant of the primary button. And then I would have to have a group of 3 different buttons, each button or each group for a different color. And then if I add a new color, I would have to add 3 new components, and if I add a new variant, then I need to add 5 new other components, or 4 in case I don't have any additional color. So as you can see, this is clearly not scalable, right? It's not maintainable. So the way that we do that in React is to allow the user to customize, and then we add some logic in the button component itself. For example, we could also think about another way of customizing it. So let's say we have another component, greeting text, right? And this greeting text is going to be responsible for saying good morning or good evening. So all we're going to do here is we're going to define the greeting text. And this is going to be good morning, right? So let's say here we'll receive something via our props, and if props dot time of day equals morning, then we say good morning. Otherwise, we say good evening, right? So if the time of day equals morning, then we say good morning. Otherwise, we'll say good evening. And this time of day we will pass via props. And then here I want to return an h1. So if we are writing the return statement like this, we don't need to wrap it in parentheses. But all I'm going to do is I will use, or I'll return the greeting text, right? So now as you can see, I'm having the error here that the props have an implicit any type. So I'll just type this as any for the moment. It doesn't really matter for us. We'll definitely change this. So any is something that we don't want to use in TypeScript, but for the moment we don't know what this is doing, so I will leave this as any, right? And then here I could say greeting text, and I'll close this. And if I don't pass anything, this is going to be, so props.timeofday is going to be undefined, which means that it's not going to be morning, right? This is going to evaluate to false, so I should see a good evening in my screen. A good evening, exactly. Now, if I want to pass a time of day, then I can still pass anything, right? Anything. There is no strict type checking here on anything. So this will still show good evening. It's not going to complain, right? So maybe that was already compiled exactly. So still good evening. But now if I pass morning, then it's going to show good morning, right? So how can we define, or how can we establish that time of day must be either morning or evening? Well, this is one thing that we will discuss in TypeScript, of course. And once we have this ability to define which exact values our props can receive, then you will see that it's way easier to maintain and to scale a React application, because we don't need to worry about, or I mean, we need to worry to some extent, but many of our concerns about input validation or prop validation, they are already solved by using this functionality from TypeScript. Okay, so I think we have done some good progress for this video. We have already integrated Material UI. We can now start developing the UI of our application. And then in the next video, we will, I think, start with a brief discussion of some aspects of TypeScript. So if you want to get some notifications, if you want to be informed whenever a new video is out, many of my playlists are still ongoing and I try to post videos every day. So if you want to get a notification, make sure to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you. Bye-bye.